the one and only Dr. Peter McCullough on Wednesday, May 28th, 2025 at 11:02 a.m. Eastern Time. I was actually talking to some people yesterday who were interested in advertising in my show, and they're like, "We can't find you on YouTube." And I was like, "Actually, I was banned for interviewing Dr. McCullough." And they were like, "Well, you should have known after all the Joe Rogan flack." And I was like, "I did it first. I was cool. I was getting banned before it was cool." So that's how long I've known Dr. McCullough. But you just testified before the Senate. Like I said, I listened to that with you and Senator Ron Johnson. And I will say, first candid, like legitimate, like just kind of shooting from the hip, my response to it is from the first time I ever saw a video of you, which I believe was 2021, till now, and I mean this as a compliment, you are way more aggressive. There's not, I don't mean that like in an unprofessional way. You can just tell in the very words, you're more clipped. I can tell you've kind of you've kind of lost your patience with this. So, Dr. McCall, how are you doing, sir?
Tommy, thank you so much for having me on the program. And a quick update, YouTube has dropped their censorship screens and profiles. So you can repopulate all of your videos on YouTube, and you should. It's going to take some time, but you should. You should build up your YouTube library and get that fully monetized. You deserve it. You've been such a hardworking podcaster, and I agree. You were actually there first before a lot of people came out. When Joe Rogan had me on, there had already been 2 years into the pandemic. 2 years. And I now have some podcasters reaching out to me. And of course, their claim is that they're big and they've interviewed all these, important guests. And one of the first things I'm going to point out is that, listen, we're basically, more than 5 years into this now.
Yeah.
We're 5 years into this. And, a lot of people are late to the game. And when I finally go on Glenn Beck or Megyn Kelly or Chris Cuomo or on CNN, that'll be the first thing I say is, listen, boy, you are late to a party. You've been late to the greatest controversy that we've ever seen, pandemic and the medical response and everything that goes along with it. But you're right. I have become far more assertive in these Senate hearings because I now understand the tactics that the senators and the congressmen on the House side use.
What do you mean that I think with most people, even myself, my first, I wouldn't say Senate, but just going on YouTube, I naively thought, oh, I'll have on these doctors and we'll get this all sorted out. And I now look back at it and I'm like, it's a pit of vipers. You need to go in there with a sword and a Bible. Like I'm like, I look at back at me and I'm like, I'm so naive. Is that what you just kind of in general? You're going into a den of vipers.
Well, I led in the May 21st, 2025 Senate hearings. So we're talking about Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, the permanent subcommittee on investigations. I led in my opening statement, said, listen, the last time I was under oath in the U.S. Senate, or the very first time, which was on November 19th, 2020, and for Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, the first words that came out of Senator Gary Peters' mouth was that before I even said a word, that what America was about to hear was misinformation. And this is 2020. I don't even know what misinformation was. It's not used in the medical literature. It's not used in, wasn't used in discussions of important topics. And so I pointed this out in my opener now 5 years later. And I said, what was Gary Peters doing by saying that? We were just bringing America the news that we could treat COVID-19. We were bringing late-breaking data. Why would he want to poison my testimony before it even comes out of my mouth? And what I told America, on Wednesday, May 21st, 2025, is what Peters was doing, and the same thing that Richard Blumenthal was attempting to do, is they were attempting to gain leverage over me. So they were using an old communist propaganda technique. And they said, well, misinformation, as if they hold the truth and I don't. And I pointed out that, over the last 5 years, we've had emerging sources of data and observations. There's multiple points of view, and that all opinions are valid. There's no room for misinformation or other propaganda tactics in Senate hearings.
Yeah, that's kind of a it's kind of an absurd claim to preface something with this is misinformation. Well, it shows right out the gate, what their intentions are. And I believe, and I know Senator Ron Johnson is, to my understanding, is more on your side. One of the comments he made in the testimony that really kind of raised my eyebrow was he said, it's prefaced this way, and I don't think these are his thoughts, rather he was phrasing it. He goes, it's prefaced this way, and there are these kind of verbal parameters around it because they feared vaccine hesitancy. But the entire concept of hesitancy should be around, well, there's a legitimate fear. It's not children. It's not like you're 3 years old and it's the first time your parents are like, jump into the pool and you're scared. And it's if your older brothers are making you, you're gonna drown, your parents might be like, hey, don't say that. He's not gonna drown. Versus if you're like the first person to ever skydive in the history of Earth, I think it's probably natural to have hesitancy. So the idea that hesitancy itself should be avoided is outright unethical.
I agree with that analysis. This term vaccine hesitancy arose as something that's bad in medicine. There's actually vaccine hesitancy scales, and there are campaigns to abolish vaccine hesitancy. And the pretext to this is that vaccines must be universally good, so therefore vaccine hesitancy is bad. Well, I agree with you. When any new drug is introduced, there should be some hesitancy. We don't know if it's going to work or not. If there was a brand new antibiotic or a brand new anti-diabetic drug, there should be some healthy skepticism. And when the vaccines were rolled out, initially Pfizer and Moderna, they are the synthetic genetic code for the lethal part of the virus called the spike protein. And this had never been done in the history of mankind. Of course, there was skepticism. Of course, vaccine hesitancy is normal, it's healthy, and we should embrace vaccine hesitancy.
And in your testimony, you mentioned why, and it's surprising to me, why did we see more, I guess, urgent black box warnings in the UK as opposed to the United? I think in general, everyone's kind of, I know at least mine, and it's biased. Concept of the UK is like, yeah, it's whatever problems we have in the US in terms of free speech, it's, 10 times worse there. But that's kind of fascinating that they grabbed the bull by the horns and put the black box warnings on.
Well, what I testified to is I didn't review the regulatory history in the UK, but I did point out that in the UK and Australia, they actually published guidelines of how doctors should recognize and diagnose vaccine myocarditis because it was so common. Now, if it was rare, and again, the false narrative says myocarditis is rare, it's not rare. And that's the reason why these UK and British documents exist. They say, listen, this is what it is. The young people take the vaccine, they suffer heart damage, they develop chest pain, dramatic EKG changes, positive laboratory blood troponin testing, they go into heart failure or have a cardiac arrest. And here's the proper use of diagnostic techniques, including MRI. Well, we don't publish those documents for rare complications. This is because it was so common. Well, all of this came out in the Senate hearing, and the Senate hearing is a formal part of investigation. It generated an interim report, Tommy. It's on my desk. I can show it to you, and this is really astonishing. This interim report, which I've had a chance to read, has 54 pages and over 200 references. And it cites 16 different government officials. So people in Health and Human Services, CDC, NIH, and FDA, the White House, they all knew the vaccines were causing heart damage, and they worked to cover it up for months.
What realistically, and I I have to make sure I don't, that I do oscillate between, realistic expectations and unrealistic. As outwardly incompetent, if not directly malevolent as the government has been, it's like, who is the government? They're people like you and I. That doesn't excuse it, but I don't know. You look at something like, the House on Un-American Activities after the business plot in 1933, where, the DuPonts and I don't know, the Morgans tried to pay off a former general to essentially lead a coup against FDR because he wanted to get rid of the gold standard. And it was years later, and he's in there. He's the most decorated Marine in U.S. history. And he's going on saying this is a credible threat. The House agrees it's a credible threat. Back then, by the way, the New York Times said it wasn't. They said it was misinformation. So there's the history repeats. And then nothing happened. Then when I guess that is. I mean, I think it was in the church committee. It could have been before or after. There was another House committee on un-American activities about acoustical evidence in Dealey Plaza, and they concluded that there was a probable conspiracy. And now we're looking at this, or you can even say in the wake of the Iraq War, weapons of mass destruction, again and again and again. It's very easy. I get it. I'm 34. I have no life experience, and I'm painting with a broad brush. And we are an empire, and we're massive, and I get it. Time and time again, there seems to be this false reward for people like myself or yourself. Where like we got them to admit that it was a lie or it was an issue, but nothing really comes from it. And I think for a lot of people, that's very disillusioning. What realistically, and it might be that this is the win, that this is the realistic compromise. What realistically comes from the Overton window shift of the last 5 years? Not that you have the $1 trillion answer.
Yeah, there are mechanisms, and our mechanism for investigation is the special counsel. And I've felt for a long time now, we have more than enough evidence to go ahead and pull the trigger for basically 3 special counsel investigations. And one is on the origins of SARS-CoV-2, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the U.S.-Chinese collaboration. And what would a special counsel do? The special counsel would identify targets, that is, people we think almost certainly are perpetrators. That would include Anthony Fauci, Peter Daszak, Ralph Baric, Chinese collaborators. Those are targets. Subjects are other people who are witnesses that could become targets. And that broader group would include, I think, the entire White House task force, others involved in the National Institutes of Health, the BARDA, which is a research group at NIH, NIAID at NIH, and of course DARPA in the military. I think they could be subjects. And then finally, there's witnesses. I would be a witness, for instance, in that type of investigation. So the special counsel should be pursuing target subjects and witnesses, and the alleged crimes are at least fraud, and as a consequence, Americans died, and so that's mass negligent homicide. The second special counsel is on the suppression of early treatment. So as doctors evolved the community standard of care, which was to treat patients early for COVID-19, it was considerably impeded, if not crushed, by, again, targets, and then there'll be subjects and witnesses, but CDC, NIH, FDA, White House task force, that's a lot of people, American Medical Association, American Board of Internal Medicine, American College of Physicians, American Board of Medical Specialists, and we can go on and on about who suppressed early treatment. Same crimes would be considered here. And then the final special counsel is on investigation of COVID-19 vaccination, which may have been the most deleterious part of the pandemic. There we have, again, the same groups, but we'd add in now the biopharmaceutical complex, these companies and affiliates, defense contractors who make the vaccines, all the fraud and corruption, as well as the results, injuries, disabilities, and deaths, mass negligent homicide, personal injury, that resulted from that. So until we have special counsels, what these hearings accomplish is they uncover the truth for the public, and the only court that's really, rendering an opinion here, Tommy, is the court of public opinion. And the public opinion has shifted greatly away from favoring vaccines to basically not favoring COVID-19 vaccination and that's the end result is informing the public.
So I guess a special counsel in triplicate and so the origin and then the suppression of alternative treatments
Hmm.
and then the vaccination itself. And
Right.
I would imagine just chronologically you would have to say the origin would be the biggest. But in terms of the subsequent two, and I think you said this on my, I don't know, they all run together. Which one do you think was more, and obviously just, all hypothesis and conjecture, which one do you think was more lethal, the actual administration of a dangerous vaccine or the suppression of alternative treatments?
Well, we could apply US data. So in our Senate hearings, Richard Blumenthal cited the CDC data about COVID vaccine deaths. And so it comes out to a rounded number of 1.2 million Americans. But, as defined, that's being PCR or antigen test positive at really any time and then subsequent death. That's how a COVID death is defined. Now, in the National Center for Health Statistics, which is in the CDC web archive, they've examined these deaths, and at least in half of cases, there's no pneumonia whatsoever, none. So they couldn't have died of COVID. So we take that 1.2 million, immediately cut it in half. Now we're down to 600,000. I think if rigorously adjudicated, we would get down to maybe 120,000 actual COVID deaths that would actually, meet a clinical adjudication standard.
Okay.
So if we're at 120,000 COVID-19 illness deaths, and I think I've testified under oath, I think 85% were preventable. 85%. That means probably, the illness itself, despite all of efforts possible, took out 20,000 Americans, maybe 30,000 Americans. Now we take the vaccines. The vaccines in the CDC VAERS system, which does imply causality. It's very important. People have misstated this. Doctors report to VAERS. The first several screens of VAERS is who's the doctor reporting. It has to be accurate reporting. We have to think the vaccine caused the death. In fact, I wouldn't report deaths because they happen in medical practice. I wouldn't report them attributed to the vaccine unless I was certain the vaccine played a role. So it is causality by inference. The VAERS system, Tommy, has 19,400 Americans who have died after taking the shot. About 1,200 die on the day they take the shot in the vaccine center a few hours afterwards. Another 1,200 of those die the next day. So it's very, very quick. And that 19,400 is, in FDA testimony, probably underreported by about 30 because we have to have the death certificate. We got to have the vaccine card. We have to have a doctor willing to put his career on the line to do this. So we are somewhere around 560,000 Americans who've died after the vaccine. So the vaccine was far more injurious, resulted in far more death than SARS-CoV-2 infection.
That is so wild. For reference, 425,000 Americans died in World War II. That is,
Wow.
yeah, so you're clearing that by about 20%, which is insane, which is absolutely insane. Um, in terms of going back to almost both prongs, the origin as well as you said defense contractors and I guess third parties around the production of the vaccine. I think one of the more interesting and actually not interesting, I'd say one of the more terrifying episodes you and I have ever done was I think it was December 2022. You did like a presentation on my show about the DARPA P3 Adept program.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I mean, it really was the calls coming from inside the house moment where we're walking it back up. And you showed pretty conclusively this is a military operation. And there's kind of nowhere to go. It's like your house is robbed and you're fingerprinting it and it realizes it was like, your brother-in-law. And it's kind of hard to wrap your head around, as well as the origin and, gain of function research. It seems like both forks in the road kind of lead back to the military bio-industrial pharmaceutical intelligence apparatus. Is that why? it's so difficult to get to the bottom of this? And is that why? And again, this is all conjecture. Is that why the censorship was so complete and so powerful and so uniform? Is the only time, and I was 13 when it happened, but the only time I've ever kind of seen wall-to-wall coverage in unison was the invasion of Iraq. Is that why we're leading back up to the castle and it's like, oh, we have to fight this?
Yeah, I think that's these types of comparisons, parallels are very important. The 2005 PrEP Act, it says that there will be acts of biological agents, bioterrorism, if you will, that's anticipated. And there will be pandemics, and it will be like a war that instead of fighting, another country, we'll be fighting a virus or a bacteria or a fungi. So pandemics are posed as being a war
Hmm.
on the public. And so the military is involved. They've clearly been involved for a long time in planning for this kind of biological threat to the population. And their response is called countermeasures. That's a military term. So the COVID-19 vaccines are considered countermeasures, covered countermeasures by the PrEP Act. So is remdesivir. So are hospital operations, and so are masks and lockdowns. These are all countermeasures. So they all have this coverage under the PrEP Act. They're immune from liability. So in war, Tommy, if our country is defending itself and, the tanks roll down the street and our army has to occupy your house and your house gets destroyed, it's like, sorry, this is part of military operations. The same thinking goes on here, and it's still on their website. DARPA, the Biological Research Division of the military, you wonder why they have it. They announced a program in 2012 called the ADEPT P3 program, and it has a life cycle. It says there will be pandemics, and our military will end them with the use of messenger RNA vaccines. That's in 2012. It's on their website. So it wasn't Operation Warp Speed's idea. It wasn't, Trump or Biden. I mean, the military had this idea in 2012. I mean, someone should have advised the White House task force to say, listen, tell America that DARPA, our military, has been planning for this for a long time.
Yeah, it gets a little eerie when you learn about like War Plan Orange, which was the island hopping campaign in the Pacific in World War II, and how we had that plan in like 1910 before World War One. Now, granted, I understand the military also just has plans for everything. That's how you don't want to be scrambling to plan as the war is unfolding. I think it was in Korea, the Korean War in the 50s. DARPA was planning for the next war, which they somehow knew was a jungle war in Vietnam. And then, what, in 2000, Project for a New American Century, that thing written by a bunch of the people that would become Bush's cabinet about, terrorism and cataclysmic events in Manhattan. It gets a little, and it could be, let's play devil's advocate. It could be that they're just fantastic at predicting. And I also, and not sarcastically, I should say, I should play devil's advocate more meaningfully and earnestly. I also get that you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, that they are tasked with this stuff. Right after 9/11, they thought it was the next thing was going to be a bio war. And that itself wasn't a new idea. I mean, we all know about Operation Paperclip, bringing the Nazis back, rockets, blah, blah, blah. A much lesser known one was Unit 731 in Japan, doing biological research, and the head physician, Dr. Shiro Ishii. We brought all of them back too. That was in 1945. And because Japan said the next war will not be a machine war, it will be a bio war. So this goes back decades. So I do meaningfully say it's a lot. It's very easy. It, it's the spoiled granola hippie liberal college age girl saying capitalism's evil. It's like, yeah, there are problems, but like you've never experienced the world. You wouldn't know what hard work is if it knocked on your door. It's also very easy for me to sit here on a podcast and pontificate about everything wrong in the world. And I also I don't know what it's like. I don't know what it's like being in the Pentagon, and I don't know. And then not only that, it's classified, so you can't even come out and say "told you so." It's it's now I don't really think that's what's happening. I tend to think they're demons from hell, but I do have to show, I guess, some sort of self-awareness and be like, I don't know. Maybe without this program, it would have been 1,000 times worse. I have no idea. And just also for the record, I'm speaking for myself and not Dr. McCullough. I know I'm going off on a tangent, but so to kind of loop it back in, um, and to shift from the testimony or more evolve from it, what were you saying beforehand about RFK?
Well, first, let me just address that last stanza. The difference, Tommy, between a foreign invader launching a missile strike or an attack is as a citizen, I have to rely on the government
Sure.
to intercept those missiles. I
Yeah,
have to. I don't have any ability to intercept missiles. But when SARS-CoV-2 happened, the government wasn't directly fighting the virus. The government wasn't treating sick patients. The government wasn't doing anything.
that's very true.
I mean, essentially, they were getting in the way. It fell to doctors. It fell right in my lap. And
Yeah.
what I said in the recent US Senate testimony, I said, listen, my role in this was to fight disease, preserve life, and above all, do no harm. Nobody at the CDC, the NIH, or the FDA, or the White House Task Force did any of that. So if anything we've learned in a pandemic is a pandemic is not a military analogy. It's not, because
Yeah.
the government is not protecting us. It's going to fall to doctors and nurses and healthcare. It's going to fall to individual citizens to make their own decisions to protect themselves. And that's the new normal that we live in. We're getting ready. At the wellness company, we have emergency kits. People buy emergency kits, and they're going to basically be ready this next time for whatever comes. And we've been told by everybody, Ashish Jha, the former White House coronavirus coordinator, Anthony Fauci, so many others, there's going to be another pandemic for sure. Like, how do they know? They only come every 100 years. Well, now they're going to come very frequently, probably out of biolabs where gain of function research is going on.
Yeah, no, that's a fair counterpoint. Is yeah, I have no ability or concept on how to fight a ballistic missile. Like what in God's name do I know? But you're right. I mean, in terms of the pandemic, a lot of it did come down to go out, get some sun, get some
Mhm.
rest, and there are remedies you can use that are not super expensive patented corporate products. So, and I tend to agree with you, and I tend to not even agree with I guess the postulate I made about playing devil's cap, but I have to at least try to be aware and be like, yeah, maybe I don't doubt someone in there was legitimately trying. I mean, if I know people like you, I have to assume that then, other, analogs of you can exist in the government, and
Mhm.
maybe they exist doing things where they can't come on the show and talk about it. It's classified and they'll go to Guantanamo if they talk. So I have to just that was the whole thing.
Well, Tommy, let me just respond to that. I was
Yeah.
at some meetings where, at one meeting, I think at Hillsdale College, I was there. Scott Atlas, who was a former White House advisor, Anthony Mamoli, who's the current interim director actually was the former interim director at the National Institutes of Health before Bhattacharya came in. They were at that meeting, and we had this type of discussion. And they said, listen, public health authorities in the setting of a pandemic, they don't have that many tools because they don't directly treat patients. So that's the reason why they spend so much time on masks and lockdowns and social distancing recommendations. And what I told Scott Atlas in one of these exchanges, I said, Scott, from a mask to dying of this illness, I mean, there's a long chain of events because basically we all got sick with COVID-19. It all depended on our individual risk factors, uh, whether or not we had natural immunity from a prior infection, whether or not we got early treatment, and then what strain of the virus it is. Well, all those major factors make whether or not you wore a mask for an hour or 2 hours, relatively irrelevant. The mask is, no matter what, the mask is not a powerful intervention in a pandemic. It was analyzed by a Cochrane analysis, showed us essentially public masking was useless. The same thing with social distancing. It's effectively useless. And hand sanitizers. So all of these things, even vaccination, essentially is useless because in a widely prevalent pandemic, even with the safe vaccine, it's very unwise to mass vaccinate the population because a viral illness like SARS-CoV-2 will quickly figure out whatever vaccine is being used, and the virus will mutate and then thrive among the vaccinated. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, and it's do you think that this is a case of that card was played? I mean, in the same sense that, after 9/11, not that I know, but I don't think there were any hijacking attempts. You've kind of burned that card. Now there's metal detectors in the TSA, and they put bulletproof vaulted doors in the cockpits. You kind of can't do that again. After JFK, I think that was the last time any president ever rode in a car without a top. You can't really do it again. Do you think that's what it is? We're not going to see this again because you can't do it again, or do you think they're going to go back to the well?
Well, we've seen two attempts so far.
Yeah,
One was
monkeypox.
monkeypox. Yeah, monkeypox. Listen, we actually had a national health emergency declared by Biden, a public health emergency declared by Xavier Becerra, our HHS secretary. Listen, they went all the way on this.
Yeah.
And the difference is there was the narrative that there's monkeypox. And again, the lead intervention is a monkeypox vaccine, in this case, the Jynneos vaccine. And then the counter narrative. So instead of me being a year late on COVID in the media, I was out in the media right away and other people in my circle saying, listen, no, this appears to be a sexually transmitted disease. There's a drug called tecovirimat that's used. We need to advise on safe sex practices. There's protection from prior smallpox vaccination. So people my age, it's not a threat anyway. And so because the narrative was so weak and the counter narrative was so practical, no one went into a monkeypox frenzy, and it just died an unceremonial death in the media. Nobody brought it up anymore, and even though there's cases, nobody cares. Then bird flu. Now bird flu arose, and the same thing. It got up to a certain tenor. McCullough Foundation did the research. We found that it looked like it was gain of function research out of Athens, Georgia, that produced the current strain that's circulating, spread from farm to farm by mallard ducks. The biosecurity industry got into full swing, culling, ridiculously and uselessly culling healthy chickens, and the virus just continued to reinfect the farms. And ultimately that died. People gave up on that. The price of eggs went up, then they've come down. So what we've learned, Tommy, is that most of this battle, if you will, is fought out in the media between a government narrative or a biopharmaceutical complex narrative that tries to steer the entire population into mass vaccination, and then the counter narrative that no, there's more reasonable approaches.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it almost seems like you almost wonder if they knew the monkeypox thing was gonna fail, but they went back to the well anyway. Like cash grab sequels. Like Anchorman is probably my favorite stupid movie of all time. Sequel's never any good. Nothing's ever no follow-up to a classic like Super Troopers, no Animal House, no follow-up to a classic is ever good, but it's just enough that they can still dip in and pad their wallets. The difference is those are movies as opposed to a bioweapon, but you almost wonder if they knew wasn't going to work, but it's like, hey, beat the dead horse a little more. Um, to kind of pivot when you mentioned Nathaniel Mead in your testimony, who you got on my show and who is awesome, and the papers he's published. Do you think that that's sort of like the death knell in the, I guess, the entire vaccination, I don't know, doctrine or narrative?
Yeah, these papers, we call them the Mead papers, are published in the International Journal of Vaccine Research and Practice, peer reviewed. The unique nature of these papers. There's part one and part two about the mass vaccination campaign, and now there's a third paper dedicated to myocarditis. The unique aspect to them is the comprehensiveness of these. And I think all three together, I testified, I think they nearly total 1,000 references. So people said, well, where's the evidence? I said, well, go to the Mead papers. The citations are right there. And in this Senate hearing, May 21st, 2025, and so people can understand. So Senator Ron Johnson is the majority chairman. Senator Richard Blumenthal from Connecticut is the ranking member, so he's in the minority. And then there are Democrats and Republicans on either side of that. And then the witnesses, I was the lead witness for the majority, followed by Jordan Vaughn, an internist out of Birmingham, Alabama, then Jim Thorpe, an OB-GYN, then Joel Waskog, an orthopedic surgeon who himself developed transverse myelitis, was paralyzed from the vaccines, and then Aaron Seary, a vaccine litigation attorney. And then for the minority, it was a physician, current Hawaii Governor Josh Green. So Green and Blumenthal, and when she was there, Maggie Hassan and then the Democrats on that side, they would represent, in a sense, the biopharmaceutical complex, kind of the pro-vaccine side of the argument. And in all of our deliberations, Tommy, not once did they argue the vaccines were safe. Not once did they argue against, our observations on myocarditis being fatal, damaging. So their only point to be made that's left is a false talking point. And they put it up on poster boards and they just repeated it over and over again, that the COVID vaccines saved millions of lives, Tommy. And it's a false narrative. It's the last government false narrative. The vaccines save millions of lives. We've heard Representative Brad Wenstrup, who chairs the House subcommittee on investigations of the coronavirus origins, say that. We've heard President Trump and Biden say this. In fact, Trump and Biden are closely aligned on the vaccines. The Trump policy and Biden policy are nearly identical, that they say the vaccines save millions of lives. There's no prospective, double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trial that ever found the vaccines reduced death. In fact, the Pfizer trial showed there's more deaths with Pfizer. There's no valid, non-randomized studies. There are, no claims allowed by the FDA in the package insert that the vaccine save lives. So if you go take a vaccine, it doesn't say a benefit of the vaccine is that this will save your life. It's simply a false biopharmaceutical claim made by the last stand for the vaccines. So what they're saying is, we believe the vaccines save millions of lives, so therefore it was all worth it. And if some people were injured, or if they were disabled, or if they lost their lives with the vaccine campaign, in a sense, it was all worth it. Again, back to this war analogy. It was a war, and it was all worth it in the end. We had to defend the country. And I'm here as a doctor to tell you, Tommy, we never accept that. I would never accept large numbers of death with a vaccine, even if it did actually fulfill the promise of saving lives. I would never trade lives to try to save lives. No, we would always treat the disease and preserve life. I could never send a patient off to a vaccine center and then hear back from their family that they're dead in the vaccine center. And sadly, that happened with over 1,000 Americans.
Yeah. I think you talked about that. One of the first times you were on my show is in no time in history has the protocol been go home until you're blue in the lips. Like it's madness. And I think we've said this before, but the reason I not just dislike the war analogy, but the reason I think it's factually incorrect is back to World War II. At the same time we were working on the Manhattan Project, we were also trying something else where we had these time delayed, basically little jelly, napalm jelly packet bombs that we were gonna tie on a bats. It sounds like something that you come up with in second grade, because the bats you would drop them out of a plane in mass, and they would go and find nooks and crannies to hang in and sleep until the night. And a lot of the cities in Japan were primarily timber based. The idea was that you would drop out like 5 million bats from a bunch of bombers. They would fly down with these little, jelly packets the size of your hand. There'd be a 12-hour delay on them, and then they would go up and they would nest and whatever, and then they'd all explode in the middle of the night.
Oh,
Oh, yeah, 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 and we actually legitimately tried this, and we tried it out in the desert, and it didn't work. They were supposed to go to a Target barn. I think they went to a nearby Air Force base and burned it down. Conveniently, like I want to say, like less than a week later, we successfully detonated the A bomb, and we kind of just scrapped the bat one. But my
hmm.
point is that is what you do in total war. Is you go, we're either going to throw bats at Japan, we're going to try to create a star, or we're going to throw a million men to their deaths. But that's total war when you're truly trying everything. And you know they're trying everything because it sounds stupid. This was not trying everything. If you were truly trying everything, sure, you would throw the full force of the government and the private sector at warp speed. You would also do something, if you're willing to do something as stupid as bats, you'd also be willing to try something a lot less stupid. Like, here are these things you can go buy at CVS, vitamin D, ivermectin, or whatever. But they didn't. That tells me that it's not total war, and that tells me that there is no true intention behind it. So, what's the point of that? Okay, you poked a hole in one argument. No, no, no. That is the foundational argument. That is it's not taking a Jenga block out of the top floor. This is the bottom Jenga block. They're saying we had to save lives when that itself is completely faulty. If you're if you're doing a physics equation or building a physics simulator and you don't code gravity correctly, or you don't code, electron orbits correctly, you don't just go, yeah, we got that part wrong. Everything after that is wrong. The atoms, the molecules, the organisms, the cells, the tissues, the organs, the organ systems, your entire equation is wrong. It's not that you poked a hole in one thing, it's that the foundational argument, if you point out that, hey, you said one plus one is three. Oh yeah, you're right. Well, no, no, no. Now the rest of your chalkboard is incorrect. You fail. That is my problem with that. Is it's not true based on simply precedent. This is not even a
Well,
hypothesis. This is precedent.
Tommy, that's you really hit on an important point. If it was truly this aspiration to save American lives, and the contention is vaccines, we had to do it to save American lives, then how come there's no discussion about Operation Warp Speed monoclonal antibodies saving lives? They did save lives. They actually were safe and effective. Blumenthal didn't mention them. Josh Green didn't mention them. Josh Green was a ER doctor in Hawaii. How come he didn't mention monoclonal antibodies? I did. I used them. The shortcoming is they were taken off the market shortly after introduced, and despite buying enough for every sick American, they never got distributed out where they could be used. No mention of monoclonal antibodies. How come they didn't mention Paxlovid? That's Pfizer's product, the oral product that came in about 2 years into the pandemic. Well, there's mixed data on Paxlovid, but they didn't mention that. How come they didn't mention corticosteroids or colchicine, antithrombotics, or even the full breadth of the McCullough protocol? No mention of nasal sprays and gargles. So if it's truly a war and our government is trying to save lives in a war, your point is, why wouldn't they say do everything?
Mhm.
Do everything, right? If it's a war and the things you can do are close the door in your house, barricade the door, defend yourself, get in the basement. Why wouldn't you do all those things, right? Um, I think I think you've hit on something. There's some dishonesty even behind the motivation of saying we had to vaccinate, that vaccines save lives. They're not being honest with themselves.
And if one example isn't enough, World War One, 30 years prior, it was peach cores could be used in gas masks. They weren't as good, but in terms of you got to make millions of them, you could, like school kids would go and collect peach cores and they would put them in the gas masks. After World War II in the 50s, there was a program it was almost like a civil defense thing. It was just called skywatching. And it's where you, man, woman, child, young, old, you could go out and just stare at the sky. And they told you what the silhouettes of different Soviet jets looked like. And they had awards and medals, and it went on until we developed a better radar system. But that's what you do when you're truly terrified of an existential war. Is you Marge out in Illinois, you want to go stare at the sky for 9 hours? Like, yeah, sure. Okay, we could actually use your help.
Mm.
That's what you do. They didn't do that. And so that again is so and it's
Well,
also
Tommy,
yeah.
let me give you a concrete example of what our
Yeah.
government could have done. You really hit on something. If this was an existential, in a sense, biological threat to the country, and the government was sincere about saving lives, they would have immediately called a meeting in Washington, said, listen, I want every doctor out there who's learned how to treat this illness and save lives to come and share their approach. What are they doing? Let's get the best ideas out there, and let's immediately inform other doctors and nurses and hospitals on what to do. Let's stop these hospitalizations and deaths. Now that was on Trump's watch. So that means Trump, Alex Azar, Fauci, the entire White House Corona Task Force, they should have done that. My phone should have been ringing off the hook saying, Dr. McCullough, you claim you can treat COVID. You've just published the most prominent paper in treating COVID, the American Journal of Medicine. We want to talk to you. The only people who called me were Senator Ron Johnson and Director of Commerce at the time, Peter Navarro. That was it. My phone should have been ringing off the hook. The government and the Trump administration in particular was not interested in saving American lives with early treatment.
And again, it comes back to, I guess, more of my disillusionment and also just I don't believe them is because I was able to get in touch with you. It's
Right.
still
Yeah, I'm
not
not hard to get a hold of.
no, and like now it's like my podcast is doing a little better. This was 4 years ago. Still just doing it out of my apartment. And people, how did you get in touch with him? I Googled his name plus the two words contact information, and he came on. How did you do it? I put it on Zoom. That's you. No one wanted to, and the fact that you're getting all these requests now, it's almost bittersweet because you know that it's like they're finally having you on, but you also now know it's like, well, there's no urgency because the spineless people are willing to have you on, and it's not that they're late, it's that they didn't want to have you on, and it's I try not to be depressed about it. How is it more on like a larger, bigger picture? How has this changed your view? Just at, I mean, this country, your field, human history at writ large. For me, it's made me look at history a lot more with a lot more scrutiny. It's also made me really respect and appreciate those rare figures throughout the world who tried to do the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing. And
Hmm.
that progress is, it really is, you make it in like an inch a century. I know that's kind of beyond the scope of like medicine, but like what is it like has it made you colder? Has it made you appreciate the few good acting people out there? Has it brought you? I know for me, it's brought me closer to God. It's really made me understand
Hmm.
like, oh, you do have to struggle. Oh, you workout's good when it hurts. How has it changed? I would imagine I know the answers. It's hardened you. You've come out more aggressive and you're still going. But how has it changed you?
Yeah, I would say at the outset that before we leave this war analogy, it's brought me to a conclusion that recently Lou Rockwell at the von Mises Institute came to. They held a meeting, and I wish I could have attended because it looked great. And the theme of the meeting was how how people rewrite history when it comes to war.
Hmm.
When it comes to war. And the COVID pandemic, we'll consider that a war. And so with each war, in the end, both sides, have to justify what they did. They have to justify and portray heroism. And no one admits they're wrong
Hmm.
on any aspect of war. They don't. I mean, even if you go, to Germany or to Russia, you don't see, admissions of being wrong. I mean, I even went to Nuremberg, and we went to the stadium that the German soldiers, were presented to Hitler.
Hmm.
I stood right there. I read all the plaques. There wasn't a great degree of capitulation there. They were simply describing what happens. What happened? People don't admit they're wrong. And all of these, and there's two sides of a war. You think somewhere someone would say, you know what, we made a mistake. And I can't, I'm not a war expert, but I haven't seen anybody on the side of COVID on either one of these sides admit they're wrong on anything. They simply haven't. And I don't think we're going to see this at this point in time. And if people can't see where they were wrong in their positions, then we can't learn. And if we can't learn, the same mistakes will be repeated over and over again. People were hoping that Trump would come into office. He'd come out and say, "Hey, listen, I was misled. I was wrong. The vaccine campaign just didn't work out. Didn't save lives. We still have COVID around. No one's taking it anymore." By the way, all of those are true. He has huge safety concerns. So I've directed RFK to pull these off the market. Hasn't happened. In fact, Trump won't bring up the vaccines. I know Wayne Root, who's close to Trump. Wayne's in media in Las Vegas. Wayne always puts questions on his card for Trump. He wants to ask Trump about the vaccines. No discussion. So isn't it curious, on the biggest issue
Hmm.
that has confronted and in many cases ruined American lives, that is the pandemic and the vaccines, isn't it interesting that Trump cannot distinguish himself from Biden?
And you
Trump and Biden are aligned on the vaccines. It's Biden and Trump policy are unified on COVID-19 vaccination.
and you've said that before on here. Despite all the differences, the one Venn diagram, the one centerpiece is that. And for more comparisons, I would say Obama, 2008, we're going to shut down Guantanamo. Guantanamo doesn't get shut down. The drone war expands, and he later justifies it as just war theory.
Mm-hmm.
Man, if that doesn't kind of hit you where you go, there does seem to be a center monolith, a momentum, a power elite inertia. It's which also tells me that well, that's good. That's the thing to aim at. And lastly, and I know I gotta let you run, is what you said about admitting wrong. The only time we've ever heard any, I guess, wrongfulness be admitted was Secretary of the Air Force Curtis LeMay. Dr. Strangelove. He's like it's making fun of him. He's the cigar chomping general.
Mm-hmm.
He said he's glad we won World War II because had we lost, he would have been charged for war crimes for the firebombing. But that was sort of but we didn't lose. And I'm not even passing judgment on that. It's just the only time I've ever heard anyone of any meaningful power say that. Secretary of the Air Force said,
Uh,
I'm
uh,
just glad we
Tom,
didn't lose.
Tommy, I have to add this in since you're such a historian. So when I visited Nuremberg, I went to the office where they did the Nuremberg trials of the Nazi Germany doctors who, did these horrific experiments on, those imprisoned. And, when looking through those letters, the doctors didn't come out and say we're wrong. Again, they didn't admit, right? These are horrible things that were done to people. They simply said we were following orders.
Mm.
So the question is, are Biden and Trump and the chiefs of staff and so many people in Washington, are they following orders? And
I believe
who's
so.
giving them the orders, Tommy? Who's giving them the orders where they can't show any uniqueness on this? Now, obviously, Senator Johnson, he didn't get the order, and neither did Marjorie Taylor Greene. But why are so many people still acting as if someone gave them some orders to support these vaccines when obviously they're failing, they're unsafe, and so many people have lost their lives? I'll let that be the last question, Tommy.
Yeah.
I'm Dr. Peter McCullough. Thank you so much for having me on the program. Let's make this go viral. Get it up on
Yes,
YouTube.
yes, sir. It'll be up today, guys. Please go to the description. Please go grab his book. Please go to his Twitter. Please go to the Wellness Company. Get the emergency kits, all that good stuff. Dr. McCullough, I love you, brother. Thank you so much for your time. You're doing the Lord's work. It's an honor to know you.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank you.
watching, everybody.